I never thought much about the little things. Waking up to the smell of coffee, feeling the crisp morning air on my skin, or the sound of my kids giggling in the next room. Life was busy, predictable, and full of plans. I had a career I loved, a family that meant the world to me, and dreams for the future. But cancer doesn't ask for permission. It barges in uninvited and wrecks everything in its path. It started with fatigue. Not the kind that a good night's sleep could fix, but a bone-deep exhaustion that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. Then came the weight loss. First, I brushed it off as stress. Life was demanding. I had 2 teenage kids, a job in marketing, and bills to pay. Who wouldn't be tired? Who wouldn't lose a little weight? But then there was the lump. A small, hard knot under my right rib cage. I poked it, prodded it, but ignored it. Until one night, as I was putting my daughter to bed, a sharp, radiating pain shot through my side. I winced, and she looked up at me with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her big brown eyes scanning my face. I forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Just a little sore." But I wasn't okay. Not even close. The next morning, I called my doctor, expecting to be reassured. "It's probably nothing," I told myself. "Maybe a pulled muscle." But deep down, a whisper of fear had taken root. The tests started: blood work, ultrasounds, CT scans. My doctor, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, called me into her office a week later. She didn't beat around the bush. "We found something," she said, her voice careful but firm. "A mass on your liver." The words hit me like a wrecking ball. I barely heard the rest. Biopsy. Possible malignancy. Next steps. My hands felt cold. My head light. Cancer? That was something that happened to other people. Not me. Not a healthy, 39-year-old mother of 2. But reality didn't care about my disbelief. 2 weeks later, I sat in an oncologist's office, clutching my husband's hand as we received the final verdict. Stage 3 liver cancer. Aggressive. Treatment needed to start immediately. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up and realize it was all just a nightmare. But there was no escape. Cancer had come for me, and it wasn't leaving without a fight. The world blurred around me as the doctor explained my treatment options. Surgery wasn't an option, not yet. The tumor was too large, too intertwined with critical blood vessels. My best hope? A brutal cocktail of chemotherapy and targeted therapy. I sat there, nodding, but my mind was miles away. How was I going to tell my kids? How would I keep working? Would I even survive long enough to see my daughter graduate high school? That night, after tucking my children into bed, I sat on the couch with my husband, Mark. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. Finally, I broke the silence. "I'm scared," I whispered. Mark wrapped his arms around me. "You're not alone," he said. "We'll fight this together." But deep down, I knew that cancer was a solitary battle. No matter how much love surrounded me, I was the one who had to endure the pain, the sickness, the fear. A week later, my treatment began. Chemotherapy was exactly as awful as I had imagined. The nausea was relentless, turning even the thought of food into a nightmare. My hair, my thick, dark brown hair that my daughter loved to braid, began to fall out in clumps. By the 3rd week, I shaved it off entirely, staring at my reflection with hollow eyes. I looked like a stranger. But the worst part wasn't the physical suffering. It was the mental war. I woke up every day knowing my own body was betraying me, that there was something inside me trying to kill me. And yet, I had to keep going, keep smiling for my kids, keep pretending I wasn't terrified. One evening, after another round of chemo, my son, Jake, sat beside me on the bed. He was only 14, but he had grown up overnight. "Mom," he said, hesitating, "are you going to die?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to lie, to promise him that I'd be fine. But I had sworn to be honest with my children. "I don't know, sweetheart," I admitted, "but I'm fighting as hard as I can." He nodded and squeezed my hand. "Then I'll fight with you." Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced a smile. That's the best medicine I could ask for. Through the darkest days, my family became my anchor. Mark researched every treatment option available, refusing to let me give up. My best friend, Lisa, set up a meal train so I wouldn't have to worry about cooking. My kids wrote me little notes of encouragement, tucking them into my pillow at night. Still, there were moments when the fear was unbearable. When I sat alone in the bathroom, sobbing, convinced that I wouldn't make it. But then, something changed. At my 3-month scan, the oncologist's face held something I hadn't seen before: hope. The tumor has shrunk by 40%, she said, flipping through the images. You're responding to the treatment. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a glimmer of something I had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope is a fragile thing. One moment, it lifts you up like a gust of wind, and the next, it slips through your fingers. For a while, the good news kept me afloat. The tumor was shrinking. My oncologist seemed optimistic. My family was rallying behind me. I dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, I would win this fight. But cancer is a relentless opponent. It doesn't play fair. By month 5, the side effects of chemotherapy had worn me down to my core. My body was a battlefield, weak, trembling, wrecked. My immune system was shot. I caught every cold, every infection. The simplest things, brushing my teeth, walking up the stairs, became insurmountable challenges. And then, one night, it happened that I had just finished another round of treatment when I felt a sudden, stabbing pain in my abdomen. A cold sweat broke over my skin and the room spun around me. Before I could call out, my knees buckled. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, staring at the ceiling as machines beeped around me. Mark was there, his face lined with exhaustion. The infection spread fast, he said, his voice thick with worry. They had to stabilize your liver function. It was close, Emily. Too close. I turned my head away, ashamed. I had always been a fighter, but in that moment I felt defeated. Over the next few days, I barely spoke. Nurses came and went, doctors checked my vitals, but I didn't care anymore. What was the point? Even if I beat the cancer, what kind of life would I have left? I had lost so much: my hair, my strength, my dignity. Was it worth it? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lisa sat beside me, her fingers curled around a cup of coffee. She studied me for a moment before speaking. I know that look, she said. You're thinking about giving up. I didn't respond. She set down her cup and leaned in. You know what? I get it. This is hell. But do you remember what you told me when I was going through my divorce? You said, you're stronger than you think and you don't have to do this alone. I swallowed hard. I had said that. Lisa took my hand. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to be scared. But you are not allowed to give up. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to Jake and Olivia. And you sure as hell owe it to the woman I know you are. Something cracked open inside me. The despair, the anger, the hopelessness, I let it out in a flood of tears. And then, when I had nothing left, I made a decision. I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Something shifted inside me that night. Maybe it was Lisa's words, or maybe it was the raw, undeniable truth. I wasn't ready to go. So I fought. Harder than before. The doctors adjusted my treatment plan, balancing the chemotherapy to keep my body from collapsing under the weight of it. I started physical therapy to regain my strength. Some days I could barely move without wincing, but I pushed through. Mark would help me out of bed, his hands firm but gentle. One step at a time, he'd say. That's all we need. One step at a time. There were still bad days. Days when the nausea left me curled up on the bathroom floor. Days when I cried into my pillow, exhausted beyond words. Days when I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But then there were the good days. The days when Jake sat beside me and told me about his basketball practice, his voice full of excitement. The days when Olivia crawled into bed with me, her little arms wrapped around my waist, whispering, I love you, mommy. Those were the moments I clung to. At my 6-month scan, I held my breath as the doctor examined the results. My heart pounded in my chest, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, she looked up, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The tumor has shrunk by 70%, she said. We're winning. I felt the air rush from my lungs. I was winning. For the first time in months, I let myself believe it. But cancer wasn't done testing me yet. One afternoon, just as I was beginning to regain my strength, I woke up feeling a strange, sharp pain in my right side. I tried to brush it off, but it grew worse by the hour. By evening, I was back in the emergency room, the doctors rushing to stabilize me. A blood clot, a dangerous complication of the treatment. Mark paced the room while the nurses worked, his hands running through his hair. I reached for him, squeezing his fingers. "I'm still here," I whispered, trying to reassure him. But I was scared, too. The next few days were a blur of medication, monitoring, and whispers of concern. I had come so far. Was this the moment my luck ran out? No. I refused to believe it. I had already defied the odds. I wasn't stopping now. With careful treatment, the clot dissolved, and my doctors cleared me to continue my battle. They called me remarkable, a fighter, a miracle. But I didn't feel like a miracle. I just felt like a woman desperate to live. And I wasn't done yet. Month 9. I had grown used to the rhythm of survival. The treatments, the checkups, the waiting rooms filled with faces etched with the same quiet fear. But unlike before, I no longer saw myself as a victim of cancer. I was its challenger, and I was winning. The tumor that had once threatened my life was now a fraction of its original size. My body, though battered and weak, was still standing. I had made it through every setback, every sleepless night, every moment of despair. And then came the moment I had dared to dream of. My oncologist walked into the room with a thick folder of results, her expression unreadable. I held Mark's hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white. She sat down, took a deep breath, and then smiled. "There's no evidence of active disease," she said. For a second, I couldn't process the words. "What?" I breathed. "You did it, Emily," she said, her eyes bright. "Your body has responded better than we ever expected. You're in remission." The air rushed from my lungs. I covered my face with my hands, my entire body trembling. Mark pulled me into his arms, his own shoulders shaking. I had won. The fight wasn't over, not completely. Remission wasn't a guarantee that cancer would never return. But for now, for this moment, I had beaten it. When I told Jake and Olivia, their reactions were exactly what I needed. Jake, trying to be the mature teenager, nodded stiffly but blinked away tears. Olivia threw her arms around me, sobbing into my chest. "You're not sick anymore?" she whispered. I kissed her forehead. "Not anymore, sweetheart." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. My body had changed. My mind had changed. I would always carry the scars of this battle. But I was alive, and that was enough. Months later, as I stood outside on a crisp autumn morning, feeling the sunlight on my face, I realized something. Cancer had stolen so much from me. It had taken my strength, my security, my sense of control. But it had also given me something I had never expected. A new appreciation for life. I had learned to cherish the small moments, the warmth of my daughter's hug, the sound of my son's laughter, the simple joy of a deep breath. I had been to the edge of darkness and I had fought my way back. And now I was here. Whole. Grateful. Alive. I had beaten cancer. Against all odds. And that was my story.